Rubric Row 3 deals with understanding and analysing perspective. Notice in this row there are 3 levels of performance described, one earning 0 points, one earning 6 points, and one earning 9 points. Remember, in AP Seminar, a perspective is defined as a point of view conveyed through an argument. In this row, you're really looking for how the response has treated multiple perspectives. The central question in this row is, does the response have multiple perspectives? If the answer is no, then the response cannot earn points for this rubric row. Note that a response may make hasty use of lenses, all of which convey the same perspective, and in that case the response will only have one perspective and will score 0 for this row. Also, the answer to this question may still be yes and result in no points. If the perspectives are unsubstantiated, for example conveyed as personal opinions, then the response will not receive points. A low response may assert, for example, that some people think the government is too controlling, others don't, without providing evidence to support either claim. Low responses in this row are often emotionally charged rants. Also, if the response engages in no comparison among the multiple perspectives, then the response cannot ascend to earning points. In the middle descriptor, the response would have compared multiple perspectives. The comparisons often manifest superficially, describing only basic agreement or disagreement. A common medium kind of response may, for example, mention counter-argument and label it as weak or invalid without fully explaining why. In the high descriptor, however, the response goes beyond merely comparing, but also interprets and draws connections between multiple perspectives by putting the ideas, beliefs, and reasons behind perspectives in conversation with each other. Part of that dialogue will include an evaluation of the perspective's limitations and implications. Said in another way, the high response does more than interject additional points of view. It enters into conversation with them in a critical and meaningful way, considering their strengths and or weaknesses in a thoughtful and relevant assessment which often supports the response in making its case. As a tip, the multiple perspectives will not always manifest as competing. Let's consider some examples. Let's first take a look at a high-scoring response, training sample 1. The response earned 9 points for this row because it analyses multiple perspectives to address the complexity of the problem of night shift regulation. The response considers the multiple perspectives of the various stakeholders involved, employees and their wellness, employers and their demands, and federal governments and their regulations. Furthermore, the response puts the various perspectives in dialogue with each other through an evaluation of perspectives, limitations, and implications. For example, at the bottom of page 6, by putting the practical limitations of employers in conversation with governmental regulations that would mitigate negative effects on night shift employees, the response puts 3 perspectives in conversation with each other. Furthermore, the response consistently considers the limitations and implications of perspectives. For example, the response conveys that the need for federal government to regulate night hours has limitations. For example, it states, firstly, organisations that manage certain industries will need to revise their regulations to fit the government's, which can involve complicated processes. Then secondly, shortening night shifts will force employers to adjust work schedules, as well as employ new members to make up for the cut hours. Employers accommodating circadian rhythms also has limitations, as effective naps for night workers calls for long and unfeasible break periods. You can see that on page 5. Also, when the response analyses Tina Water's suggestion to practice good sleep hygiene, the response acknowledges the limitations of her methods by explaining that they ignore the time constraints attributed to many night workers and do not sufficiently alleviate the circadian disruptions. So let's take a look at a low-scoring response, gender inequality. The response earned a 0 in this row because it merely identifies different perspectives, which are occasionally unsubstantiated. Although it attempts to address multiple issues related to gender inequality, it focuses on the overarching perspective as discrimination against women. Instead of developing multiple perspectives, it briefly recognises them without delving into their significance. Evidence of this can be seen in the simplistic discussion about women of colour, women in the house, women at work, and governmental bodies' treatment of women. Also, the subheadings maternity leave, reproductive rights, women in corporations all deal with different aspects of women's rights, but there is no interaction between these subtopics. Furthermore, the response offers unsubstantiated opinions about the different perspectives. It lacks an attempt to evaluate the perspectives in a manner that is grounded by research. Examples of such unsubstantiated statements include, the burdens of pregnancy and childbirth fall upon women but never upon men, and women are less likely to leave the relationship because they are scared and less brave. So, this sample scores 0 for this row. Let's look at a medium scoring response for this row, training sample 2. The response earns 6 points because it describes multiple perspectives and engages in cursory comparison among them. For example, in the section of the paper called Visible Hand of the Korean Government, the response cites the government's desire to prevent people from suiciding in response to Koreans' high stress rate followed by high suicide rate, but the response doesn't explicitly elaborate on the relationship between those two perspectives. The response also contrasts critics who praise technology with Korean citizens who may feel isolated. Some critics appraise the development of informational technology which enabled the globalization through social networking. Ironically, Koreans feel more disconnected and secluded within this globalized world. However, the response merely mentions the perspective rather than integrating it into its discussion about isolation. Moreover, due to an absence of transitions, there are mostly isolated perspectives in the sections of the essay, and as such, these multiple perspectives are not often placed in conversation with each other. Consequently, the paper does not rise to the high level for this rubric row. Furthermore, while it makes simplistic evaluations of different perspectives, it doesn't consistently consider the objections, implications, and limitations of each throughout. In the section titled Hypocrisy of Technology, for example, the response presents a mostly one-sided view of the role of consumer electronics and their production. Although there are moments that evaluate a perspective, such as when the response states, Koreans believe that being a Samsung man is the only way to be successful, since the students only seek for secure professions rather than looking for what they really want to be. But these evaluative statements do not expound on how the perspective is limited. Let's take a look at another medium scoring response for this row. Training sample 3 earned a score of 6 because it cursorily compares multiple perspectives related to a discussion of salaried and hourly employees. The predominant perspectives are those of hourly employees and salaried employees, and within those, the response aims to demonstrate different points of view. However, the perspectives themselves are often oversimplified, which limits the interpretation of the perspectives and precludes it from the highest score point. For example, in the provided excerpt, the response distills the argument in favour of salary pay to salary pay does not correlate to higher chance of cancer. Additionally, the response does not transition between the different sections of the paper in a meaningful way that connects the perspectives. Instead, the perspectives are presented as isolated from each other and therefore not presented in conversation. Moreover, while the response identifies families as potential stakeholders in this issue by explaining hourly pay is more beneficial due to the fact that they work from scheduled times and have more time with their families than salary paid workers, the implications of this issue for other stakeholders, for example businesses, are dealt with simplistically. For example, on page 6, the response explains it is less beneficial to the company. Also, the evaluation of different perspectives is simplistic. Often the evaluation is more descriptive than analytical in nature. Take, for example, the following sentence from the section titled Hourly versus Salary, the Opposing View. This shows that the debate over hourly versus salary pay is growing and constantly changing as unemployment rates change. This leads to the fact that hourly pay is more beneficial because workers will not be able to force to work overtime, therefore giving them a higher drive and performance rate at work. The response relies on the source's argument as true, which limits the evaluation from observing the objections, implications and limitations that would govern the discussion about perspectives in a high-scoring paper. So this scores 6 points in this row. So, let's recap for row 3. Our guiding question here is, does the response have multiple perspectives? And we know if the answer is no, it will score 0 for this row. However, low responses can manifest in several ways. Low responses may only identify perspectives with little or no interaction between them. Responses may provide unsubstantiated statements about different perspectives, such as personal opinions or rants, or, as we said before, they may only include one perspective. There are many ways to get 0 points in this row. Medium responses compare perspectives, but may simplify the perspectives or make general comparisons that don't allow dialogue between the ideas and beliefs of other perspectives. High responses interpret the perspectives and draw relevant connections, putting them in conversation with each other. At this school point, you may find sources put in dialogue with each other, often through the consideration of objections, implications, and limitations of various perspectives, or the addressing of the counter-argument.